Okay, you guys, shut up. I want to talk about Obsession. You've heard a lot of takes on this movie already, but it's time to hear from the voice that really matters, the Nikki community. There are many instances of horror presenting us with two possible interpretations of a character and letting the audience decide for themselves which is the truth. John Kramer from Saw, a twisted genius who maintains an extreme but unwavering moral code, or a crazy old man who finds a way to be sanctimonious while torturing people. Danny from Midsommar, a brave young woman who finds community and strength after experiencing a conga line of trauma and disrespect, or a naive child who is love-bombed into offing her boyfriend by a cult who may very well have her in a flaming bear suit the second she is no longer useful. Hannibal Lecter, gayer European. But in Obsession, the filmmakers have created a character that was clearly meant to initiate a lengthy discussion about the nature of ethics, personal responsibility, and gray morality, only for the whole audience to go, oh no, he's bad. We get it. He's the bad guy. This is a film that is at first sight about a young, shy man named Bear's descent into hell after a monkey paws style wish goes wrong, but it's not actually his hell, it's Nikki's. And I don't mean the hell Nikki, was personally in when the woman sitting beside me in the theater would not stop talking, and not even like quippy comments or even better side arguments with her boyfriend that would have at least been a little more compelling. Instead, she was just like reiterating what was happening on screen, like, oh no, his cat, or oh, he's looking it up. Like, madam, is this the first time you have experienced storytelling as a visual medium? And as I said, this is not some hot take. This is not some theory that I must justify. This is something that every reasonable viewer will leave this film knowing. But I am still compelled to dissect it with you, to see how far this character's selfishness goes, and beat this dead horse like he's an old coworker that I hated from 10 years ago, and you're my best friend at brunch after 1.5 overpriced mimosas. Chin chin, motherfucker. This movie starts off with Bear practicing how he's going to tell Nikki that he's in love with her. And at this point, he's willing to try basically anything except listen to another woman's perspective. He's a very sad boy. His grandma is dead, his cat is dead. The two are only loosely linked due to his neglecting to throw out some dangerous prescription medication. He ends up at an occult shop in an attempt to buy her affection and leaves with a poorly reviewed knickknack called the One Wish Willow. Why did he purchase this stick when the cashier implied it ruins people's lives? I guess just because, again, not great at listening to women. That night he drives Nikki home from a trivia night and they kind of dance around the subject of his obvious crush on her. She brings up that their friend Sarah might have a thing for Bear, and I think that's notable. I think it's important to remind men who have chosen to fixate on a woman or women that they view unattainable that it's not that they live in a cruel world where no one gives the nice guys a chance. It's that sometimes attractions just don't align, and that goes both ways. Bear is under no obligation to find Sarah attractive any more than Nikki is to Bear, but I've met some men who literally seem to think that unrequited love is a purely male experience, when the reality is men are just more likely to make it everyone else's problem, whereas women are more likely to write folk music about it. Their banter continues. Bear decides to take his friend Ian's advice and nag her using the nickname she was mercilessly bullied with, Freaky Nikki. And this queen, after calling him out on how inappropriate that is, goes ahead and pierces through this facade and asks him directly if he likes her. Now, I'm going to talk about 3 moments in this film that are in their own way the point of no return for Bear's character. One is the most obvious point in the film where everyone, regardless of how distractedly you were doom scrolling or whatever while watching, will recognize that Bear cannot be redeemed. The second is a little earlier, and it's a more subtle point where I think it's very reasonable to deem Bear as unredeemable. And then there's this point where maybe it's not completely fair to write off his character entirely, but I'm gonna do it anyway. She asks him if he likes her, and he says no. That's it. It might seem dramatic to declare that he is a bad person based on that one instance, but our whole intro to this character, besides him accidentally killing his cat, has been him wringing his hands over how to best reveal his feelings towards her. His friend Ian says that he should wait till the right time, and she literally tells him this would be the time. But he denies it because the possibility of being rejected by her is apparently worse than never knowing how she feels, even when she is openly asking for clarity. Like, at a certain point, isn't she entitled to know what her friendship is predicated on? Aren't you now crossing the line between keeping your feelings to yourself and creating a web of dishonesty? And you might say it's the fear of ruining their friendship that stops him from admitting his feelings, but my dude, she knows. They always know, okay? If she continues to hang out with you despite these stop and start romantic gestures and cryptic lines, it's because it's not a deal breaker, even if she isn't interested in you. It's your reaction to her reaction that might ruin the friendship, because either your ego can't handle being around someone who's told you no, or because you never actually saw any value in a friendship that doesn't have the potential for sex. But I haven't even gotten to the stick yet. I got home and immediately spoiled this movie for my roommate, and he's like, why is everyone cracking sticks in horror movies lately? And it's true, people do be cracking sticks. But Bear decides to use this one-wish willow to wish for Nikki to love him more than anyone else on the planet. And big surprise, it works. She is not only immediately up on him, but acting very strangely in general, and occasionally having these brief moments of lucidity before being back to being up on him. Bear's course of action throughout this night is kind of none. She doesn't shut her down completely, but is also too disturbed by her out-of-character behavior to go all the way with her, at least. Low bar. Limbo bar from hell. The next day, Ian has a simple explanation for Nikki's behavior. Party drugs. Apparently, our girl Nikki was merely tripping on MDMA at her weekday coworker trivia night, but turns out that's not as unlikely as it sounds because she has a history of this. We don't really get any more information than that about it, but considering the Nikki we see before the wish is almost painfully normal, it's very possible that acting strangely while on drugs in her youth is the reason for her nickname, Freaky Nikki. But when Nikki turns up at Bear's door telling him that yes, that was the reason she was acting strangely, but she still, for reals, has feelings for him, Bear doesn't seem all that concerned that his friend is back to getting high and acting crazy on a random Wednesday night, because, you know, she said she for reals has feelings for him. So they start dating. They're doing cutesy things in a montage. Like, if this were a different kind of movie, this would be the footage you see after Nikki's been murdered and Bear's dreaming about her while seeking revenge on the man that killed her, that kind of thing. But soon, things start getting crazy again. Bear finds out that Nikki is lying about her father having cancer. He wakes up to find her watching him sleep, looking like a ghost from a J-horror film and screaming about him not loving her enough. Bad things happen to an already dead cat. Please leave this poor cat alone. Justice for Sandy. Ian, who doesn't even know the extent of Nikki's behavior, becomes pretty concerned that Bear is taking advantage of her at a vulnerable time. We do find out later that he has some ulterior motives when it comes to discouraging their relationship. He was banging Nikki before the wish. I don't know why I'm being clever about it. This is obviously not a spoiler-free video, but Bear has no reason not to take this concern seriously. All he knows is that Nikki was a regular girl to the point of being underdeveloped, honestly, and started acting crazy around the time she decided she had feelings for him. Whether this is the result of the wish or some other outside source, he is determined to not even entertain the possibility that their relationship might be bad for her. When he confronts her about any of this behavior, it's only to let her know that she needs to stop doing it, with zero attempt to figure out the underlying cause or address her obviously failing mental state. Because if he keeps his head in the sand, he gets to keep being with his dream girl, or the puppet version of her that currently exists. In terms of the One Wish Willow, it is simply comical how uncurious this guy is about this seemingly magical artifact. In any other horror movie, the protagonist would be flying around town, talking to experts, visiting the factory it was made in only to realize it had been abandoned in the night, reading from dusty old tombs, taking any avenue to figure out what it is and where it came from. This guy asks ChatGPT about it once, then calls it a day. It's only when the packaging from the Willow starts playing its tinny little jingle in his car, as if even the cursed item is saying, "Hello? Do you seriously not have any follow-up questions for me?" that Bear calls the customer service number on the box. And this is the second and perhaps most accurate moment of damnation for Bear, because his big question for this customer service worker is if he can alter the wish. Alter. After all this freaky stuff going on, after eating his cat, he doesn't want to just go back to square one. He is not happy for Nikki to just be his friend again, even if it's the most straightforward path to getting anything like the real Nikki back at all. He just wants to tweak the situation a little bit to get her to start putting Black Forest ham in his sandwiches instead of his dead pet. To his credit, when the voice tells him that that's impossible, he does decide that he wants to cancel it, which it turns out is also impossible. Unless he dies, which honestly, don't threaten me with a good time. The voice also lets him hear the real Nikki, who it turns out is just screaming nonstop. When he goes into his apartment, he discovers that freaky Nikki has been standing by the door waiting for him all day and is leaking from all ends, to say the least. What does he do now that he knows that one version of the woman he loves is screaming into the abyss and the other he can't even pretend is anything but an animalistic shadow of her? Does he lock her up for his and her own safety until he can come up with a plan? Does he go back to the shop for information and assistance? I mean, we know that wouldn't work. He's a horror movie protagonist. You don't get out of this with just a receipt and a refund request. But he doesn't even try. He goes to a party. Ian has essentially dared him to come to a party without Nikki as proof of them not being, at the very best, painfully codependent. So Bear decides that proving the validity of his relationship to his friend is more important than the installment of The Grudge that is currently happening in his apartment. So he brings it up and, of course, fails to get her to stay home. The vibes of the party? Not super immaculate. It ends with Nikki violently smashing herself in the face until blood gushes down her forehead. We see some quick cuts of Bear driving her to the ER, having a heated discussion with what looks like a nurse, and them not going in while Nikki just kind of vibes out. It's not completely clear why they don't get in to get Nikki treated. Maybe she just refused, but it kind of looks like Bear is trying to get someone to deal with her without them entering the building, probably because then he'd be forced to answer all kinds of uncomfortable questions, which is just another sign of how not seriously Bear is taking any of this. A room full of people saw her bash her own head in. It's not like there's any evidence you're actually hurting her. You probably could have had her taken to the psych ward, which is not a nice time for a woman who's essentially been possessed through no fault of her own. But as someone who released her bowels on your carpet today, it's probably at least the best temporary measure for all involved. But once again, even as things spiral even more and more out of control, Bear does not want to fix the situation that he caused. He only wants to fix Nikki back into the girl he fell in love with. Back at the apartment, they obviously have a pretty tense time. And listen, she's still a freaky little demon creature who's threatening a lot of terrible things, but when he's yelling at her to just be Nikki and she's crying that she'll be whoever he wants her to be, you really start to feel sorry, not just for the real Nikki who's being held captive inside her own body, but for the freaky little demon Nikki. Like, she's trying here. You don't get mad at a duck for quacking. Don't get mad at a freaky little demon for not grasping the intricacies of healthy human relationships after being compelled into existence exclusively to love you. When he's finally gotten Nikki to sleep, he gets a text from Sarah begging to meet up with him. As he slips out, he hears Nikki whisper and realizes that it's not freaky Nikki, but the real Nikki, who is able to communicate, albeit still not move, while her imposter self is asleep. And this is when we know beyond a doubt that these are two different beings, and Bear hasn't really been in a relationship with Nikki at all. What's more, Nikki is so miserable watching all this shit unfold that she begs Bear to kill her. And his reaction to this? He asks if the idea of being with him is really so awful. That's the third moment, if it wasn't obvious. He is finally confronted with the inescapable reality of what his wish has wrought, that he has trapped this woman in her own personal hell on earth, and pulls the ultimate nice guy move of judging her for not picking him. Doing these videos is so bad for my posture. I work myself up and then I get all hunched like a little gargoyle. Anyway, he then goes to meet Sarah, and the vibes of that meeting also not super immaculate. When Nikki inevitably catches up with them, she decides bashing in her own head is so passé, and so bashes Sarah's head into a bloody pulp. This is a real wake-up moment for Bear, which sounds ridiculous. Like, if that were a literal wake-up moment, that person would be buried. They'd be in a coffin, because anyone would reasonably deduce that if they were gonna wake up, it would have been a long time ago. But the actual real-life violent murder of his friend is finally enough to spur him into taking more than a tiny tippy-toe step into ending this curse. He visits the shop. He spills the beans to Ian, none of which end up being super helpful, and as Nikki's actions continue to escalate even more, he finds himself locked in a washroom with seemingly only one way out, ending his own life. Now, listen, I know physically ending one's own life would not be an easy thing to do, as it absolutely shouldn't be in basically every real-life scenario. But if Bear wasn't such an asshole, it at least would have been a dark option at the back of his mind before now. Especially when he hears the real Nikki begging him to kill her. He did have the option to free her right then and there, an option that he, again, would have at least considered if he truly loved her and not just the idea of being with her. Anyway, he pussies out. Kind of. He can't bring himself to shoot himself, so he decides to follow in Sandy's paw steps and take his grandma's pills. But then he psychs himself out about that and tries to throw them up. Until you hear the crack of a stick. Nikki has used another One Wish Willow to force Bear to love her as much as she loves him. And they come together in the freakiest of love for about 5 seconds before Bear dies, because he does have a million pills going through his bloodstream. After which, Nikki becomes free from the curse and gets to wake up covered in self-inflicted wounds and the corpses of her 3 best friends. Oh yeah, Ian died too. I didn't mention that because I didn't care about him that much. And that's the plot of Obsession, with special emphasis on every time Bear could have made something better, but made it worse because he's one of the most selfish main characters in recent horror history. And as I said, I am not the first person to talk about how this guy is the villain of the story, but I guess I thought it was worth talking about because although it's clear to the audience, and I assume clear to the writers, I just don't know how clear it ever was to Bear. I recently watched a video essay called Investigating All Her Fault Horror by Maggie Mae Fish, a very satisfying name to say. about the fairly popular horror film trope of a main female character being forced to confront both by the narrative and those around her, her role in absolutely everything going to shit. Sometimes it's because she has made some very bad, very selfish decisions, usually influenced by some inner trauma or instability. Sometimes it's much smaller, benign decisions that absolutely no one could have predicted would have the devastating consequences the film portrays. Either way, she is forced to take the responsibility, all the responsibility for the carnage around her. Bear never has this moment, and it's not because no one thinks to bring the possibility to his attention. Ian might not have all the information about Bear and Nikki's relationship, nor entirely pure intentions, but he does make it very clear to Bear that he does have some responsibility to actively consider what is best for others, and not just his own desires when it comes to continuing on with her. Even freaking Nikki, who is basically designed to be sycophantic towards Bear like a bad AI program. Sorry, did I say bad AI program? I meant AI program. Even she, while bashing Sarah's head in, reminds Bear that this is what he asked for, so he is at least partially responsible for everything that happened. The closest Bear gets to expressing any guilt is after Sarah's death, when he opens her acceptance letter to an art school she was excited to attend. We see him break down at the idea that her life should have just been beginning, and through no fault of her own, it was violently ended. A part of me does wonder what it would have looked like if it had been a rejection letter. Like, he would have been like, oh, I guess that's good? But he offers no real apologies to Sarah or to Nikki or to Ian, I guess. He's also dead. His final stand in the bathroom is not a sacrifice he offers to make the amends that he can. It's the actions of a trapped rat who's got mutilated bodies in his living room and a crazed demon banging down his door. He died as he lived, filled with an artificial love for a woman whose life he never really cared for. This was a good movie. I'll admit, when I saw the trailer, I thought it was going to be fairly forgettable, but it was entertaining and thought-provoking all the way through. The visuals were very creepy without being over the top or gratuitous. There was only one major jump scare, the one moment where my seat neighbor's vocalizations were called for, and it was very effective. As I alluded to earlier, I think the beginning doesn't do a great job of developing Nikki's character beyond being just a generically likable romantic lead, and part of me would have appreciated that so we could see a better contrast with freaky Nikki in more subtle ways before she goes completely off the rails. But I guess you could say that Bear not even having any tangible nuances of Nikki's personalities to appreciate just makes his affections seem more hollow and thus makes the story more effective. What do you think? Want to play devil's advocate and defend Bear in the comments? Be my guest. Want to tell me about your favorite stick and how you like to crack it? That sounds awesome. Do that one. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe, and as always, have a delicious day. Hopefully completely free of cat meat. I don't think it will be good.